everyone doing? So I know you guys have been listening to panels and speakers come on stage and demo stuff. What we wanted to do, or at least I wanted to do here, is when you go back home, I want you to have concrete, well, not concrete, but like at least semi-concrete, half-baked idea of what a TGE looks like, all right? So you go home, right now everybody feels like, hey, ICOs are good and token sales are good and then they can do it. At least I want to give you, like, to make that omelet, you need the eggs, you need the tomato, the cheese, the pan, you know, the oil, and then you're like, yep, I'm done. And then you're like, oh shoot, how do I present it? You also needed the forks, the plates, the napkins, the tablecloth, right? And then the detergent to wash it all right? So I have Miko on stage, Matt, Rob, and Malcolm to help us do a working session. So it's not like us just talking. You will have, and I'll make sure that we have a mic up front for people to do Q&A. So we are talking about what is your dream team? How does your dream team look to do a TGE, token generation event, not an ICO, just an FII? Your legal team will always harp you on, whip you on this if you say that. But again, this is not a legal advice. So yes, it's being streamed, please, advisory. This is not a legal advice, don't take this. You know, whatever we say here is just
educational purposes only.
Entertainment.
Entertainment purposes.
Yes. So before we get started, why don't we introduce ourselves? And Miko, why don't you go first?
Hi, my name is Miko, and I'm an LP with Pantera Capital's $100 million ICO fund. I am also an ICO advisor. I just want to say noteworthy. I'm advising the next company up here, which is Mark Jeffrey Guardian Circle. So that's an awesome deal. I'm also founder of a cryptocurrency exchange called Evercoin, and I have a nonprofit called ICO Governance Foundation. So I'm trying to keep a lot of balls in the air. Anyhow, that's me.
Thanks, Miko.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Matt Cohen. I'm an attorney at the law firm Carlton Fields, where I co-chair the virtual currency and blockchain technology practice. We work with companies in this space on a variety of things, from pedestrian matters, corporate formation, traditional capital formation, employment, to things a little bit more salient to this talk, structuring your company or your product within existing regulatory frameworks so you can hopefully grow exponentially, but within the confines of the law.
Rob?
Hey everybody, this is Rob Massey. I'm the bean counter on the panel. There's got to be one, right? So I'm a tax partner at Deloitte, and we have been looking after a lot of nuanced cryptocurrency and blockchain topics from a tax perspective for a number of years. In the last 9 months or so, very, very focused on ICOs. And so that's most of my practice.
I'm Malcolm Casselle. I'm the sort of builder operator, I guess, on the panel. Currently running WAX, a worldwide asset exchange from the founders of Opskins. A decentralized marketplace for virtual asset trading. I come from the perspective of having built, half a dozen companies from scratch, and technical background. So, grew up coding and making things happen in the software world.
Awesome. Why don't we get started and dive right into it? So, Miko, in your perspective, in the last couple of months, weeks, what does it take to have a successful team? Like, what are the chefs you would need to make that omelet? And in your perspective, maybe you could also tell us the other side of what you may want to look out for and make sure that those things work out nicely.
Yeah, so, I think having a successful team, really begins with the founders. But I think, what we're going to hear are a lot of perspectives around tax, around audit, around legal, around advisory, PR marketing. So there's going to be almost a standardized checklist format. So the reason why I want to add on top of that is I feel like one thing that people aren't thinking about sufficiently is they're not reasoning about the post-ICO environment. So one of the things that I would consider adding to your short list is some form of economics. So, if you can find yourself a PhD with some economic theory, that would be great. If you're doing a token generation event, you're probably going to be involved in monetary policy and central banking. So I think you need to think about and reason about post-ICO economic dynamics. And I'm happy to talk to anyone about this, but it's something that is a bit of a dark art at the moment.
Okay, so you said, so if I just count them, it's the founder, you want an advisor, preferably from a finance background. What else?
Well, obviously there's sort of tax and audit, there's
Okay,
legal.
I'm
right?
writing it down, so hang on. So founder, advisor, okay, tax, audit, what else?
Legal.
Legal, okay.
All right, so that's kind of a minimum viable stack, but I would say
Yeah, don't forget your developers. You can't really do much without the guys who like make it work.
yeah, I consider, I'm hoping the founders are pretty much developers.
So sometimes there are the people with the idea, maybe understand like the business application, but then there's the folks who actually build the product. So dev and product.
Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure.
Importantly, there's linkage between these parties you're talking about, and there's
Yeah.
one that we commonly see missed, right? We see the white papers go super deep into the technical nuances, what we're doing. To link that back to the founders and that who has the vision of the business model. Remember, we're developing a for-profit enterprise most of the time. So the linkage between the technology and the business model and the transaction flow, super critical.
Got
and
it.
we see those, the recipe, as you call it, right? When there's clear vision and linkage between the technology and the business transactions in a mature state ecosystem, I think that's when you see a better sense of grace
Got
to
it.
what we're developing.
And to piggyback off that, excuse me, I think one of the most important things about a team is synergy, right? And you can't have a successful TGE without making sure everybody's on the same page. You've got to make sure that legal and tax have talked, that legal and your marketers have talked, right? That PR is on the same page with anyone who's doing press or anyone who's doing your other type of advertising endeavors. And so as a founder or as the person running the company, it's incumbent on you to put everyone on the same page. At the end of the day, most of these people on this list work for you guys, right? So put them all on a call, put them all in the same room, and force everyone on the same page, because without synergy and without open lines of communication, that's where you start to come into some serious problems.
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge is you have, you're literally talking about an entire company that is sort of quick started, because all of these functions are things that startups develop over time. Typically, when two guys start in their garage, they're not worried about tax because they don't have any income. They're not worried about audit because there's nothing to audit. They're not even worried about legal so much, other than maybe just having a corporate entity. It's minimal. But the ICO process or the TGE process, depending on whether you're security or your utility, you accelerate all of those needs, and they happen all at the same time. And in most cases, most of the folks I've run into doing TGs have never done it before. We're in literally the very first phase of people ever doing this. So you're looking at doing 8 new threads all at the same time for the first time ever. And I think that it takes a certain amount of appreciation to step back and say, wow, that's a shitload.
Right. Okay. So I wrote down here founders, advisors, tax, audit, legal, developers, obviously, and then team communication and team synergy. I was going to try to put this on the video wall so you guys can look at it, and I will definitely publish this. One of the, oh, there it is. Thank you, Brandis. Much appreciated. So while the last speakers were here, I was just quickly writing this down, and I wrote this document. So I have the legal team, the tax team, PR and marketing, code and sale platform, audit, book building, and startup team. Malcolm, tell me a little bit more about the book building piece of it.
Yeah, so thanks for asking, Kurt. I think the book building is an important piece for you to have momentum going into your sale. For us, we have an existing business. We're actually the market leader in the virtual item trading space. So we're in a unique position where we have a very large, very successful business that's centralized, and we're turning it into a decentralized business. The book building in that situation is essentially going out and talking to the early investors, the institutional type folks who invest typically $1 million plus, and you explain to them why this is a huge opportunity. That book building is key for momentum going into your public sale, because having them as partners shows the rest of the market as a signal, hey, this is a really interesting project. The guys who are considered smart money or the most sophisticated, the ones who look at everything, have already said, yeah, we want to be involved. So I would say that it's like the critical piece to making, it's not sufficient. There's lots of other things you have to do well, and you can't get wrong. It's sort of fatal if you get some of the other things wrong. But it's really critical for success, I think, going through the process.
Right. Matt, do you want to take on the legal part and tell me exactly what's involved in there?
Sure. So that's not an easy question to answer, but I'll give you some of the highlights. The biggest concern that we have today as far as a TGE is this word of utility token, right? Am I a utility token? Am I a security? Am I subject to the federal securities regulations in the US? Then we come up with this question, hey, can I form a nonprofit foundation in Zug or put my company in the Cayman Islands and just say, forget about all the laws, they don't apply to me? And the answer is almost always no, okay? So I want to get that out of the way now, all right?
Okay.
The most important thing for a founder who's starting this process is to sit down with a team, and I think legal is an important component. Step one is going to be entity choice, right? We talked about why some of these things are not the magic answer to the magic bullet to whatever your problem is. But there's different structures, and some of that is going to be motivated by the tax professionals oftentimes. And so that's one more reason why on day one, you've got to have the tax advisors in the room with the lawyers.
Right.
Once you get past that point, you start saying, okay, I've got a white paper, I've got what I believe to be a product. You've got to start thinking about if you're going to raise funds through a TGE, whether you're going to be subject to federal securities laws. And this idea of a utility token, it's more than just a label. I mean, it has to be non-incidental utility, right? You can't just take this token, bolt it onto an existing project and expect that that's going to satisfy the notion of a utility token. You've got to really think long and hard, and I think an appreciation of what a blockchain is, what a blockchain enables people to offer, really makes a good utility token. So if your use case is kind of pigeonholed or shoehorned into this space or into this technology, it's going to be very difficult from a legal standpoint for your lawyer to come in and render an opinion. That's the next step of the process often, is an opinion on whether this token is or is not a security. And if it's something, like I said, that's bolted on to an existing model, or it's incidental utility that's kind of an afterthought, oftentimes it's going to be very difficult for us to justify.
Would you, sorry to cut you off, but would you tell that team, hey, we are not going to be your legal advisor and step back, or would you still take on? Because at the end of the day, it is hitting your revenue line, right?
It absolutely is, and I joke that sometimes the measure of an attorney is how many of these potential ICOs or TGEs he turns away. And we're at the point where we're chasing people out of the office with a broom, right? Because it's an ICO for your pizza store is a cool thing to do. I get it, but like, oftentimes, if the idea is I'm going to share in a profit, share the profits for each pie sold, I'm sorry, but no matter how many times you put the word utility in this white paper, it's still a security. And with that said, I don't want to scare people away from an equity token. Okay, that's a perfectly okay thing to do. The danger is that if you're going to have an equity token and you're going to try to treat it like a utility token, offer it to the masses, not comply with the rules and regulations, that's where we get into trouble. But this notion that we have to shoehorn these ideas into the notion of a utility token is not something that I think most founders should get hung up on. Build your product and let the token follow, right? If you have a good idea, the money will come. You will raise the money, but understand that a utility token has a very specific purpose. An equity token is not bad. It just changes the way you can market. It changes the people who you can sell it to and things of that nature.
Yeah, one of the things we found in our process, a distinction, there's this thing called the Howey test, right? Which is essentially a list of checks you go through to determine how close you are to a security. And one of the things that was really important to us was that do you view the token sale as a mechanism to receive the funds to go build your product, or do you already have a product and you're pre-selling the access to it? And that is a really, really important distinction. In other words, if you think of a TGE as, hey, we're going to go get the money to go build something, versus we have something and we're pre-selling access to it, those are like literally night and day in terms of, I think, from a legal perspective. And it's one of many questions you have to sort of tackle, but this one was like really important for us in consideration.
Can a founder or anybody out here in the audience today, can they go back and do this without, I mean, are you saying the legal team is a lifesaver or a vitamin?
It feels like more like a vice to me, but you know.
It's a necessary but not sufficient element to a team, as is everybody
Okay.
else on this stage.
All right, so I'll put an asterisk. That means we definitely need these guys, right? Okay. All right, we'll go to the tax side of it. So Rob, tell us exactly or quickly what's involved in that tax. What are we doing from a tax standpoint that is a lifesaver or a vitamin?
I've not been called either, but we'll work on that, I guess. I think to Matt's point, there's an iterative process that you go through in not just deciding what you're going to do, but describing what you're going to do as it appears in a public statement or a white paper or a filing. And as you iterate on that with the attorneys, allow your accountants, your tax people, all your advisors to iterate together. Sometimes it's a lot of people sitting around a table or on the phone,
Yep.
but to iterate together, there's a lot of value in that. Not just agreeing on the conclusion, but making sure you all understand the history as to how you got there, making sure that your tax people understand the sensitivities to the securities rules, right? Understand how that interacts with the book that you're building or the people you're presenting it to do the raise. Fundamentally, people get hung up from a tax perspective because this feels like an equity raise. It feels like it. It's not. Okay? It's a lot of things, but it is not an equity raise.
But
Okay?
for a
Go ahead.
But for a founder, right, when we say tax, what exactly are we talking about here? Are we saying like pay less personal taxes?
Yeah.
Pay less corporate?
Yeah.
I mean, what's actually involved in it that, the big four accounting firms need to be part of the dream team?
Yeah, no, that's fair. So since this isn't raising a round of equity, it's not issuing debt, those are relatively tax-efficient transactions. This is not normally a tax-efficient transaction. Said differently, this is normally a taxable transaction. So if you're a company that issues a token, usually this is a taxable transaction. Whether you call it a sale of property or deferred revenue, store value, doesn't really matter. This is normally a taxable transaction. So you got to figure out, where is it taxable? When is it taxable? How are you going to describe it? And what determines the thing that it is that you're selling, this is why you got to iterate with your attorneys.
Got it.
Right? Because it's how you describe it, and not just as you're selling it. Importantly, it's how you're describing it in an end state ecosystem. The last panel, Wendy was talking about, describe the end state ecosystem. We draw a lot of pictures. We draw pictures of stakeholders and other enterprises. We draw flows of services, transactions involving tokens and crypto and fiat, all throughout a mature state ecosystem. This is critically important to determining what that thing is that you're selling, right? So allowing us to iterate together determines, if it's taxable, when it's taxable, where it's taxable, who's impacted by the tax. If it's a company issuing the token, usually the company. If there's employees involved that are receiving an allocation, there's tax. It's taxable compensation most of the time. So let's get your arms around that.
Right.
Shareholders, etc.
I've also been hearing that a lot of teams want to go off, outside, to maybe Zug, Gibraltar, I don't know, maybe Mars at some point. What is the ramifications between in the U.S. versus outside of the U.S.?
And so Matt referenced this before. Just because you're going outside the U.S. doesn't mean that you don't have U.S. ramifications, and that's true from a legal standpoint and also a tax standpoint, particularly when there's U.S. founders or U.S. companies involved. The companies who are going offshore, this is a very sophisticated transaction, and it has to be driven by something other than tax. If you're only going offshore to avoid tax, this is probably not a good idea, right? Unlikely that it's going to be sustained, because when you have an international structure, you have to live within the structure. This means real activities abroad. This means real decisions abroad. This means that you're going forward with a vision of being a large, multinational, global company, not just flipping a switch and writing a few strings of code on an island.
Nice.
If that's what you're all about, I think you're going to be very disappointed
Got it.
later on. It's going to hurt,
Right.
right? And remember, and I have to remind everybody about this, we're talking about code and transactions written on a blockchain that's usually public and immutable. Again, I'm the bean counter. I'm not the technologist in the room. But you're talking about executing transactions that are there for all the people to see, all the regulators to see, maybe forever. So it's
Right.
not like you can hide behind something easily. So this is what, people that really understand this stuff, this is what keeps you in check.
Got it. So should I be putting asterisks in front of it? It's like it looks like it's a lifesaver, not a vitamin. Okay. So you guys can see where it's headed, right?
We can add some value along the way, understand?
Okay.
So maybe there's a little lifesaver around the vitamin that's floating there.
Right. I know we have 3 minutes. I'll skip PR. I'll skip code. Code is basically who's writing your ERC20 token or whatever platform you're using. You will need an audit person as well to audit your code, the smart contract to ensure, and it can be somebody inside the team member. Right? You cannot say like, hey, I know how to write it. I can audit myself. You don't want to do that because how can I trust you if you're? It's like the mouse is in charge of the cheese kind of stuff. So you definitely need an outside team to do that. We talked about book building, and then 8 is obviously the startup team that's trying to do the TGE. I'm going to switch the document, and I did share this with them prior to make sure there's no heartburn here. And this is just to give you a rough idea what the cost is currently involved. And it is somewhat contrary. I mean, we say power to the people, power to the founders. But then at the end of the day, when you look at it, there is still certain cost associated with it. So if you're planning to do a TGE, or you're planning to go down this path, there is still some costs involved. And as you could see just from our prior slide, and I'll close it down, and you saw that we put 2 asterisks here. That itself is going to have some cost ramifications. So be aware of that. Talk to your team members and not just start writing your smart contract without getting through the legal advice. Because if you write code here on state side, but you were planning to incorporate, again, I'm not a lawyer, sorry, those guys are lawyers. Those 2, okay. I'll stop talking. But let's go back to that. Miko, Matt, Rob, and Malcolm. And Malcolm, by the way, is in the mix of it. He's right now doing a sale.
Yeah.
I think you finished
Yeah.
your pre-sale?
Yeah, the private pre-sale, we've already taken in about 30 million.
Yeah.
And that was the first of 3 phases. And we got 2 more to go.
Got it. So when you're looking at these cost structure, do you think I'm smoking crack, or am I roughly in the ballpark, at least from the low end or high end?
I'm not sure what you're smoking, so no, I don't know.
No.
But I'll tell you, it doesn't seem like it. Doesn't seem like.
Okay.
No. So I would say the costs I've found, you can have it fast, cheap, or good, right?
Yes.
Pick 2.
Definitely.
So I think that applies to every single one of these categories except for the idea, because you can have great ideas at any moment. The issue is that for each one of these, you have to choose kind of what's good enough versus how much time you have.
Right.
So we made a strategic decision. We wanted to be fast.
Yep.
So we had to cut some corners, which I wasn't entirely happy with, but was happy that we went from literally like, we're going to do a token sale to live a token sale in 6 weeks.
Right.
Which is virtually impossible.
Right.
But it took like many, many sleepless nights. But we had to cut corners.
Nice.
So we had to spend more on some things than we would have if we had given ourselves 12 weeks or longer.
Right.
So it kind of depends on what your time frame is as to how important something is to you and what you want to spend.
Right. Miko, from a VC standpoint, do you feel that this is more or less in the bell curve average from a cost standpoint when you have companies that you guys are?
So I think you're in the ballpark with these things, but really there's a huge amount of variability. For example, I was speaking with one of the ICO promotional platforms, and they were saying that you should budget $200,000 US for banner ads. And I was deeply shocked because to me, I think it reflects a fundamental misunderstanding of what's happening, which is that when you look at a token generation event, typically you see a distribution of ownership that is based on a power law distribution. And so it is really whale powered. So I think what Malcolm said about book building, private pre, that's very, very important. So I think with respect to these kind of budgets, some of these become extremely strategic with respect to how you lean in. And my notion is at the moment we're experiencing extreme tail fatigue. And so really the majority of ICO capital or TGE capital is probably going to be whale powered. So get ready for that.
Nice. By the way, just on that banner question, how much? Who knows the cost of those banners we have put out outside? The 15 feet banners. Anybody? 1,000? 3,000? Any other choices? So those cost us, and by the way, we did it we didn't charge anybody for that. We wanted to do that. We actually have more banners, but we couldn't hang them, so they're just lying around rolled. That Miko cost us just the 15 feet, if I'm not wrong, like 10,000. All of them.
I think the notion of it was like Facebook banners or.
Oh, you're talking about
Ad banners, digital ad banners.
Ignore. All right, I know we are out of time.
Those are nice banners, dude. Really nice banners. I love those banners. Nice job. That was a great. Yeah, no, really, yeah. But by the way, I think it's really wonderful. I just want hats off to you. I'm not wearing a hat, but Kurt, this is an amazing event.
Thank you.
And
Thank
we're
you.
really, really appreciative of what you've done for the community. Yeah.
Thank you.
The other thing is, I think it's really the one thing that's lovely is how you put faces to all these companies we know. Like our lawyer at Goodwin, Grant, I've never met, so I didn't actually know what he looked like until I saw the banner. But we work with him every day. It was on
Thank
the
you.
phone. He's in Menlo Park. But
Well, they're not branded, by the way, in any way. That doesn't say BlockCon. We're going to
Yeah.
take them off, and they're made of on cloth, not on vinyl, so you can actually fold them. Take it to the next conference and say, hey, guys, can you hang these up?
That's great. Thanks, Kurt.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks,
I
Kurt.
appreciate it.
Thanks, Kurt. Thank
And
you.
anyone, if anyone has a question, catch these guys. They're here for you to answer questions, which typically would require a huge emotional hurdle of, doing a calendar invite, sending an email, and all of that. And these guys may not be available. They're extremely busy. They're here on the floor. Talk to them. Get at least your top 3 questions they answered, and maybe give them a beer. Well, we have free Coronas, so just give them the free Coronas. All right. Thank you. Thank you, Miko. Thank you, Matt, Rob, Malcolm.